Introduction to Crossing the Early Tang Dynasty starting from hanging. Opening your eyes is when hanging is done. Who else is there in this way of crossing? In the 4th year of his reign in Wude, Li Shan only wanted to settle down, embrace each other, have endless silver in his pocket, dominate the Kangfang area, and also settle accounts with his scumbag father. But one powerful opponent after another appeared in front of him, and Li Shan, who was forced to do so, tore off the mask of a kind-hearted person. He drew his sword and unsheathed it, showing his sharpness. Chapter 1. Ice and Fire 2 Heavens. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. In the 4th year of the Wude reign of the Tang Dynasty. Chang'an. In that year, Li Shan, who was only 20.3 years old and was known for his military prowess, defeated Wang Shichong first, then defeated Dou Jianda, forced Du Fuwei to surrender, and conquered the world. He gained unparalleled fame for a while. The long-standing chaos in the world has gradually been quelled, and the Tang Dynasty's overall rule over the world has been established. Li Shan, who returned to Chang'an, was appointed as a general of the heavenly strategy. Su Keifu built a palace and led the Situ and Shandong Dao Daxing terraces. The position of the Shangshu Ling was higher than that of a prince, wearing a crown and imperial robe, riding a golden carriage and drumming music, and building a literary museum. He gathered 18 scholars as his wings. Li Jianqing became vigilant. So, when the crown prince of the Eastern Palace, Prince Zhongyan, came to the Pei Mansion on behalf of Crown Prince Li Jianqing, he received the attention of countless kind-hearted people. Wang Gui, born into the Wang family in Taiyuan, although a collateral branch, was renowned throughout the world. However, the Pei family in Hedong, who was favored by Wen Shi, was a top-tier aristocratic family with 5 surnames and 7 families, and there were countless talented warriors in the Chinese language of the clan. The most crucial thing is that Pei Ji is now a disciple of the dragon and has a great influence on the sage. Although today's celebration is not a descendant of Pei Ji, his cousin Pei Shiju has a greater reputation from a certain perspective. There is indeed a happy event today. Wang Ting arched his hand and chanted, "The mirror is gone with everyone, but when the mirror returns, people will not return. There is no more Chang'an's shadow, and the bright moon remains in the air. Unexpectedly, we can break the mirror and reunite." The handsome Pei Ji smiled and said, "It will be a good story in the future." Decades ago, during the downfall of the Qin dynasty, Su Deyan, the crown prince's attendant, and his wife Princess Lekong each dispersed holding half a bronze mirror. After the collapse of the country and the fall of the family, Princess Lekong did not enter the residence of the Duke of Yu. Su Deyan rushed to Chang'an to recite this poem, and the princess wept and refused to eat. The beauty of Yang Su, the Duke of Yu, became a popular story for a while. And today's events will indeed spread as good news. Pei Shiju had 3 sons, only 1 daughter. More than 10 years ago, he married Li Du of the Li family in Longxi. Unexpectedly, a few months after their marriage, Li Du was punished by his uncle and dozens of people fell to the ground. Only one of them was exiled to Lingnan. More than 10 years have passed, and Li Du has finally returned from Lingnan. It is said that his wife Pei Shuiying has not remarried for many years. Despite her father's coercion, he is willing to cut off his hair with a knife, and his ambition cannot be taken away. Li Du rushed to Chang'an, and the couple was finally able to reunite. How could such a thing not be a good story? Pei Shiju became famous throughout the world for his ability, ambition, and intelligence in breaking away from the Turks with just 1 word in his early years. Although he was old and had white hair, his eyes shone brightly and he was full of energy in his words. The daughter in front of her has fine lines around the corners of her eyes. After more than 10 years of going to Lingnan, her son-in-law has not changed much except for her skin turning black. Her eyebrows have added a touch of vicissitudes and charm. Today's event is not only a joyful event, but also a beautiful story. Not only Prince Shi of the Crown Prince's mansion, Du Yan of the Jingzhou Du family of the Tian's mansion, and Wei Ting of the Jingzhou Wei family all came to congratulate him. But everything has its opposite side. The main entrance of Pei Mansion is bustling and joyful. At the back door, amidst the wind and snow, a woman in her 30s stood with her back straight, angry and helpless, listening to the sound of drums in the mansion, looking at the familiar but now unfamiliar old servant in front of her. Zhu Nyangzi, after a word of advice, let's go back to Lingnan. It's also for your own good. The woman cut off the railway with a nail and said, I'll go back to Lingnan and let the young man stay. The old servant sneered inwardly, but still had a smile on his face. After all, he was now considered a servant of the Pei Mansion and no longer a servant of your Zhu family. As a servant of the Pei Mansion, I naturally cannot speak ill of myself, as the old servant thought to himself. After only a brief moment of stalemate, the old servant quickly entered, turned around and closed the door with a hint of disdain in his eyes. From today on, the gentleman will surely achieve great success. If you continue to entangle yourself, you are afraid of a worrying future. The woman clearly thought of this too. She didn't come forward and make a big fuss, nor even speak out to blame the servant who betrayed her master. After a moment of silence, she turned around and left, her figure gradually disappearing into the dancing snowflakes, leaving only 2 long footprints. A few servants guarding the back door were just dispersed. At this moment, they gathered around and whispered a few words. One of the elderly people clicked twice, thinking that it was just thunder and rain, but the uncle who came back was a bit shameless. This woman has never prepared to burn jade and stone together. A father can abandon his wife and children, while a mother cannot. Li Shan felt something was not right before he opened his eyes. Firstly, the book in hand is gone. Today, I had a rare assisted surgery. I had 3 consecutive surgeries and was exhausted. However, when I returned home, I was so excited that I couldn't sleep. So I casually took a Buddhist scripture and flipped through it. When I was tired, I closed my eyes on the balcony and recited it, but I remember I still had the book in my hand just now. Secondly, there was a slight itching under his neck. He reached out to grab it, only to encounter a rope, which made Li Shan feel that something was not quite right. He never brought any jade pendants or anything like that. He couldn't afford it. Just as I was about to open my eyes and see something, I suddenly felt a bit unstable under my feet. Could it be an earthquake? Li Shan was a bit panicked and quickly opened his eyes. In front of him was not a thick night, nor was there the bright lights of the nightclub across from the balcony in the distance. There was no distance at all. Less than a meter away, there was a dark yellow earthen wall. With a creak, someone pushed the door in. This person is so short, Li Shan looked down and saw that he was a frightened little monk. You. Don't. The 2 of them were exiting at the same time, and the little monk pounced. Li Shan quickly retreated, but unexpectedly stumbled under his feet, feeling weightless and causing him to fall down. Li Shan's first thought was that it wasn't because the little monk was too short, but because I was standing on some chair. The second thought is, there seems to be something wrong. Before Li Shan could figure it out, the next moment, a rope around his neck made him understand. Oh, so I'm hanging myself. Don't panic, Li Shan is interning at the hospital, and his mentor values his calmness the most. Grab the ropes on both sides with force, exert all sorts of force, kick a little bit, and sway forward. As long as you can approach the opposite earthen wall to borrow some force, you can escape from the living sky. But next, Li Shan didn't do anything because the little monk who was already sobbing hugged Li Shan's legs and then forcefully pulled down, accompanied by a crying voice, shouting, Li, you can't be short-sighted. Are you numbing me? I can't find any shortcomings. Reading www.uukangshu.net can only let you kill me with your own hands. As a doctor, Li Shan knew that it was a side effect of suffocation, and if he didn't find a way, he would have to hiccup. Thinking about how hard I've been working for so many years, I'm finally about to make it through, and inexplicably ended up hanging on a rope. By the way, I don't know where this is. Bang. The door was kicked open again, and the woman with snow stains on her body changed her expression greatly. She kicked the little monk who had been helping her away with one kick, and behind her, a short old man shouted hoarsely, rushing over to hug Li Shan's legs and lift them up. Bang! Li Shan finally fell to the ground in a free fall, his throat thumping, his face flushed, and he was breathing in fresh air. Son, why are you so foolish? What should I do if you die? Even if you're dead, he wouldn't even take a glance. The woman was obviously not the kind of person who hurt autumn and spring. She only sighed a few times, and without shedding tears, she began to harshly scold her son's unwise behavior. Li Shan's gaze slowly moved over the woman's body. If it weren't for a prank, was he crossing over? What dynasty is this? The woman brought a bowl of water over, and Li Shan took a few sips from the bowl and tentatively said a word, "Mother." The woman looked tired, but sneered, "Do you know I'm your mother?" Li Shan is speechless. You keep talking so much, can't it be that my nickname is, For the time travel itself, Li Shan has already collapsed a bit, and in this way. It's even more frustrating. Countless memories suddenly exploded in Li Shan's mind, and he felt a splitting headache, completely dizzy with a tilt of his head. Chapter 2. Wild Monk Temple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Name: Li Shan. Gender: male. Age: 16 years old. Hometown: Qingji County, Longxi County. Birthplace: Lingnan. Residence: residing in Jijiagu outside Chang'an City. Current situation: he was sent to a mountain temple for self-cultivation due to being unconscious after committing suicide by hanging himself. Lying in bed, flipping through the memories of his predecessor in his mind, Li Shan was very satisfied that his name had not changed. After all, he had been using it for nearly 30 years and was really used to it. A 16-year-old boy, born in Lingnan, is quite tall, almost 1.7 meters tall. Longxi Li Shi, Li Shan touched his head. The elderly in the village and his grandfather have said that their ancestors were from Longxi Li Shi. Has this been passed down to their ancestors? Crunch. Li Shan turned his head and walked cautiously in, holding a soup bowl, as the cute little monk with a bald head walked in. Delang, it's time to take some medicine, he said. There are so many words. The words Dalong and drinking medicine are connected together. Li Shan frowned and took the bowl, pinching his nose and pouring it down. The little monk stared at him with open eyes and urged Li Shan to drink the medicinal juice from the bottom of the bowl before smiling and saying, "Is it bitter or not?" "It's not bitter, it's sweet. Tomorrow, you'll replace me. If it's not bitter, it's good." The little monk carefully collected the sugar he had just taken out. Li Shan stared silently at the little monk, then suddenly his nose twitched and he grabbed an oiled paper bag from the other monk's robe. "What is this?" "Chicken legs, good luck today. I caught them in the woods." "Chicken legs. Ah." Li Shan widened his eyes and opened his mouth wide. "Are you a monk? How could you be so calm after being caught?" The little monk opened the oiled paper bag and stared at the chicken legs. "Dalong, you." Li Shan remained silent for a moment before throwing down the chicken bone. "This is just your compensation," he said. Due to being unconscious, Li Shan was sent to a temple on the mountain. He had already become familiar with the young monk these past few days. Several times, he almost choked himself off by condemning the other person. In the late Eastern Han Dynasty, there was a very famous person named Kangfang. Kangfang, who was taught by Li Shan to make Li's little monk feel aggrieved, patted his mouth and tears welled up in his eyes. "Is Mr. Li awake?" A young monk in his 20s walked into the door and greeted Li Shan, glancing at the clean chicken legs he had already gnawed on. "I said, why did Brother 19 hide a chicken leg?" It turned out it was for you. Li Shan was taken aback for a moment. What kind of chicken did you have for lunch? Is the food of the Tang Dynasty monks so good? Hello, the problem is not really with the quality of the food, is it? This is the octopus, the little monk pouted and stood up. Li Shan Chao, the young monk, nodded and muttered to himself, are you a wild monk temple? What are you all called and what kind of behavior? I heard of you a few days ago. The young monk looked at Li Shan and thought to himself, this temple is going to be demolished in a few days. Let's go down the mountain in a few days. Li Shan dared not ask any more questions, but smiled and said, is my mother still in Jijiagu? Of course, where else are you going? The young monk said in surprise, is it possible that you still want to enter the Pei mansion? Li Shan flipped through the memories left by his original body in his mind and knew what he was talking about. His father, Li Du, abandoned his wife and children, and reunited with his original wife. However, his original body unexpectedly wanted to abandon his mother and go to the Pei mansion to enjoy prosperity and wealth. They rightfully refused. This is the reason for committing suicide by hanging oneself from the original body. Well, it may not necessarily be true that one wants to hang themselves, maybe it's just a bluff, or maybe it's just an accidental encounter by a young monk, which turns out to be a fake. Li Shan could sense a hint of disdain in the other person's words and sneered, how could that be? Li Du's original wife has a bit of a big background. When he heard about the Pei family in Hedong, although not as good as the 5 surnames and 7 families, she was also a first-class wealthy family. It is almost impossible to climb such a thigh, and as the son of Li Du, one's identity will naturally be excluded, unless Li Du does not want to hold on to the Pei family's thigh. Of course, what is more important is the personality traits brought by Li Shan from his past life. Since his parents passed away at a young age, Li Shan lived with his grandfather. Before he was admitted to university, he had almost done all the work in the countryside, and even worked as a salesman who had basically disappeared in modern society. He earned money and spent it himself, feeling at ease. The young monk smiled and said, that's right. I heard you're from the Li family in Longxi. In his words, there was a strong sense of envy. Tuoli. What is Tuoli? The little monk raised his head and blinked his big eyes. Li Shan looked at the young monk's gaze and pondered for a moment before explaining, the saying that the 5 surnames and 7 families were determined by Emperor Xiaowen of Wei was true. Initially, there were only 4 surnames, including Fanyang Lu, Qinghe Chui, Xingyang Zheng, and Taiyuan Wang. There was no Li surname. It was rumored that Duke Wenmu rode a camel with a bell and set off at night to Luoyang, but ultimately did not catch up. Later generations referred to the Li family in Longxi as Tuoli. But Duke Wenmu held a high position of power, eventually transforming the 4 surnames into 5 surnames. Later, he transformed into Boling Chui and added Zhao County Li, collectively known as the 5 surnames and 7 families. The young monk nodded and said, speaking of which, you come from the Li family in Longxi, and are better off than the Pei family. Not to mention the current year. Li Shan grinned bitterly and waved his hand to interrupt the other person's words. He pulled the little monk over and touched his bare little head, pulling the topic aside. He asked why they called each other 8th brother, and 19th brother, and did not avoid being vulgar. I really thought this predecessor came from the Li family in Longxi. Although Li Shan studied medicine in his past life, he was very interested in history. After looking back at his memory, he quickly discovered the problem. It's strange that the Li family in Longxi admitted to himself. The reason why Li Shan was considered a kind-hearted person in his past life is largely due to his ability to cater. When faced with people who have a desire to confide, he always uses sincere expressions and appropriate questions to make them speak up quickly. Quickly, in the mouths of 2 monks, one big and one small, Li Shan obtained a large amount of relevant information. Firstly, it is November of the 4th year of the Wude era, and Li Shan has little impression of historical dates. After recalling it, he only remembers that the Wude era name did not exceed 10 years in total. UU reading www.uukangshu.net. Secondly, this is indeed a temple for wild monks, a group of wild monks or fake monks. During the Day period, Emperor Yang of Sui recruited young soldiers from Guangzhou, and dozens of young men from Jijiagu were forcibly conscripted and attacked Goguryeo. These people later found opportunities to become deserters. At that time, the world was already unstable, but Guangzhou was still stable. These few people dared not go home rashly, so they shaved their hair and became monks on the mountain not far from Jijiagu. In a few years, the old group of monks died, and the world was in chaos with no one to control. This temple became the exclusive temple of Jijiagu. There are no morning classes, no Buddhist scriptures, and even no wooden fish. The monks are all villagers from Jijiagu, taking in some children who cannot be raised and orphans. The monks plant land and firewood every day and never avoid meat and fish. Li Shan pondered in his heart, unsure of the connection between his mother and the Zhu family. By the way, his mother's surname is also Zhu. Is she of the same clan? Zhu Ba suddenly changed the topic and said, at most 1 month, we will demolish the temple. After all, De Lang is from the Li family in Longxi, and there may be relatives-in-law in the court who have passed away. Li Shan blinked and said with a dry smile, Zhu Beige, great ancestor Shenguogong. Shenguogong. Zhu Ba looked bewildered. Li Shan licked his lips, pondering whether to explain or not. At that moment, a middle-aged monk walked in with a solemn expression and looked disdainfully at Li Shan's gaze. It's okay now, we'll go down the mountain tomorrow, he said. Uncle Lu. Uncle Lu. The two monks stood up and said hello. Li Shanmian forced a smile and bowed, but the middle-aged monk had already turned his head and left. Regarding this, Li Shan also does not feel that the other party is excessive. The father abandons his wife and children, while the son wants to leave his mother for the sake of glory and wealth. Isn't it appropriate to be looked down upon by others? Chapter 3 is said to not require payment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dalong, are you really going to Chang'an? Of course. Li Shan sat down on the stone, took a few sips of water from the bucket handed by Zhu Ba, and turned back to look at the nearby mountain from afar. It was really like watching a dead horse run on the mountain. It took him half an hour to walk this path. On the right side of the mountain where Dongshan Temple is located is the Jing River, where boats shuttle back and forth. From a distance on the left, the outline of Chang'an can be seen. Today, Li Shan went down the mountain and couldn't find his mother in the village, so he decided to take Zhu Ba to Chang'an for a stroll. Filling the water pipe by the river, Li Shan looked at the reflection in the river with satisfaction. Coming from time travel, this identity. Li Shan is not satisfied. He is also from the Li family. He is the lost son of Li Shimin and must also be the legitimate eldest son, while himself, however, it was not without benefits. Li Shan touched the fuzz of his mouth and couldn't help but smile. When Li Shan first crossed over, he was devastated. After enduring for so many years, he was finally on the verge of finishing his thesis. He was about to graduate with a doctoral degree and was likely to stay at the famous tertiary hospital in Shanghai, only to end up with nothing. When it comes to crossing or hanging, this kind of crossing method is also speechless. But when he washed his face yesterday morning, he accidentally saw a reflection and blurted out, "It smells so good. I never had a girlfriend in my past life. I can't help it, a damn face-watching world." Li Shan is most satisfied with this face when it comes to time travel. It's not an exaggeration, it's really handsome, especially with a high nose bridge and a sculptural beauty on the side. It's a cynicized Xianbei person. But with it came a surge of hatred from the bottom of his heart, and Li Shan tried to suppress this emotion. He knew it was the emotion left by his predecessor, who was said to have a similar appearance to Li Du when he was young. Li Shan pressed hard on the position of his heart, his lips slightly parted, and he silently said to the reflection in the river, "Wait, your wish will always come true." There was also Qin Shimi in the Tang Dynasty. Zhu Ba leaned over and said, "Delang, what's wrong?" Li Shan stood up straight and casually asked, "Why did we demolish the temple?" Jijiagu is the resting place of Li Shan's mother and son, and Li Shan naturally does not want to see the temple demolished. Moreover, he speculates that his mother, the Zhu family, may have some connection with the Jijiagu people. The sage ordered. After listening to Zhu Ba's stuttering explanation, Li Shan roughly understood. Although Buddhism flourished and had a great influence during the Sui and Tang dynasties, the sage Li Yuan today is not very fond of Buddhism and has repeatedly rebelled against it, facing opposition from a large number of officials. Li Yuan ultimately made a compromise, but demanded that all states and counties in Guangdong be strictly controlled, and that lazy people be strictly prohibited from avoiding corvée labor, engaging in reckless shaving, becoming monks under the name of a monk, and abolishing a large number of temples. Li Shanban's fingertips, the famous 3 martial arts of extinguishing Buddhas in history. None of them are like Tang Gaozu Li Yuan. It is possible to suppress Buddhism. After all, Li Yuan recognized the Longxi Li family. Unfortunately, they refused. Li Yuan simply climbed up to his ancestor, Laozi Li Er, and naturally wanted to respect and suppress Buddhism. However, Li Shan remembers that Crown Prince Li Jianqing of the Eastern Palace was a Buddhist disciple. There seems to be a small character, Sand. Something similar. Li Shanzai asked in detail, and the temples that can be allowed to stay must meet the standards. What standards? Passing the assessment of the top 10 virtues. At the intersection of the Sui and Tang dynasties, Buddhism flourished and the court established the 10 virtues to uphold legal affairs. The selection of the 10 great virtues is either recommended by the monks or personally appointed by the emperor. Simply put, one can either interpret scriptures or have profound Buddhism. It's pitiful to see that there are over 30 monks in the entire Dongshan temple, and not a single one can read. Most of them are skilled in hunting, farming, and even fighting. Either have fame. In other words, have value left behind. Li Shan rubbed his chin and pondered for a while, but it seemed a bit difficult to handle. The two of them walked along the road for more than half an hour, and the majestic and magnificent Chang'an city finally appeared clearly before Li Shan's eyes. A country with thousands of miles of mountains and rivers, with 9 gates at the city gates. Not seeing the majesty of the imperial residence, but knowing the reverence of the emperor. This is the final golden age of Chang'an as the core of the world, and it is also the largest Chang'an in history. Emperor Wen of Sui built the new capital and named it Daxing. Later in the Tang dynasty, the new city and old city were merged and divided into Chang'an County and Daxing County, becoming the most magnificent capital of this era. Li Shan stood at the entrance of the city and looked back. "Didn't you see Baqiao all the way?" "Baqiao is still some way from here," Zhu Ba explained. "We came around from the side." Li Shan didn't want to see the famous Baqiao willows, but rather thought of the more famous hot springs by the Baqiao side, the Huaqin pool where water slides and coagulates. The inspection of the soldiers at the entrance was not strict, and they smoothly entered Chang'an. Li Shan's first impression was that it was well organized. Although he had known the 108 neighborhoods in the outer city, he did not expect it to be so well organized. Basically, both sides of the road were high walls, the road was straight, and each neighborhood was relatively independent. Not quite like a city, but rather a bit like an industrial park in later times. The rules and regulations are neat, and the benefits are obvious. It is easy to militarize management. Even if the city is breached, the high walls of each square can still serve as a defense. The downside is that it is somewhat rigid, and the tall locust trees on both sides of the road are arranged neatly. As Li Shan walked, he thought to himself, it was really nonsense. If there were really enemy attacks, Chang'an City would be breached. It would be useless to rely on these neighborhoods. and Li Shan and Huang Chao both fought in one battle. It is estimated that Emperor Wen of Sui ascended the throne due to a coup, which is clearly a defense against the inside but not against the outside. Strolling freely on the street, Li Shan had an unknown touch in his heart. This is Chang'an, this is Chang'an. Many famous generals and officials in Chang'an city, such as Long Sun Wuji, Li Jing and Li Ji, Qing Yao Jin, Qin Shubao, and Yu Qi Gong, are stirring up trouble in this city. What can one do in such a big era? But one thing is certain, I am never willing to be mediocre. One more thing is certain, the scumbag father who climbed the Pei family in Hedong must not want to see himself become famous. The road ahead is shining brightly, but there are also faint boulders blocking the way. Pei Shi from Hedong. Although the peak of the Tang Dynasty had not yet arrived, the Pei family was still a chilling presence in the early years of the Tang Dynasty. Now Li Shan also knows who the scumbag father has climbed up to, the famous Pei Shiju. His first impression was that he was actually the evil king. When I was in high school, I read The Twin Dragons of the Tang Dynasty. I was particularly interested in the evil king and even went to search for information. Pei Shiju was well known throughout the world as early as the reign of Emperor Wen of Sui. He spoke the language of the Turkic people and was listed as one of the 7 nobles of Chao. After returning to Tang, he was still highly valued. Although he was old, he was granted the title of Duke of Ani County and was appointed as the left prince of the Crown Prince. Li Shan pondered in his heart, does this mean that Pei Shi is now standing on Li Jianqing's side? However, these are too far away from oneself and there is no source of information, making it difficult to make accurate analysis. Historical records cannot be fully trusted, in fact, most of the historical records during the Wude period are unreliable. Both the old and new Tang books depict Li Er as a pitiful little white rabbit, timidly stretching out its claws as a last resort. Are you joking? Li Er's scumbag clearly belongs to the tiger. De Lang, where exactly do you want to go? Zhu Ba was a bit nervous. He remembered the rumors in the village and was afraid that Li Shan would directly go to the Pei family to recognize his father. Maybe he would also recognize his mother. In fact, Li Shanji did not have a clear goal when he came to Chang'an. He had been living and studying in rural areas before middle school in his previous life, and it was not until he went to the county town in high school that he was exposed to a large amount of information that made his mind dizzy. When he came to Chang'an, he just hoped to have access to some information about the times to decide his next step. But when Li Shan entered Chang'an city, he quickly had a clear goal. What was the most informative place in ancient times? After hearing about 108 neighborhoods for a long time, the most famous one should be Pingkong Square, right? Li Shan was a little excited. Although he didn't have much silver in his pocket, I heard that good poets don't need to pay when playing in brothels. In this era, there are more poems than I have in my stomach. And Zhu Bamu stared blankly at Li Shan, who was daydreaming. Do you want me, a monk, to take you to the brothel? Please, be yourself. Chapter 4. Reminder. Reminder what? You are listening at novelfull.audio. It is said that sisters either love money or beauty. Li Shan had no money or face in his past life, which cannot be confirmed. However, today, he has confirmed this point. At least the sisters of the Southern Opera of Pingkong in Chang'an City during the Tang Dynasty did not even love money, only beauty. Even though he was shy in his pocket, with his handsome appearance and fearless demeanor, Li Shan calmly wandered through the Southern song. He didn't even have time to use his poetic skills. In this era, only those with money in their pockets can go to Beizu, while those with goods in their stomachs or handsome young people like Li Shan can indulge in the flowers in Nanku and Zhongxiu. Kangfang is divided into 3 types of music. Beizu selling meat, Zhongxiu. Well, it's a designated service, while Nanku is a bit like a high-end club. In the small hall, Li Shan tried to sit cross-legged in the corner, his eyes fixed on the dancing section of Guji, and his ears perked up to listen to a few young people reciting poetry and prose. He had been wandering around for 3 sessions, but had not heard anything useful except for some dirty things. Well, Li Shan is already trying hard enough to hide himself, but unfortunately the light is too bright, appearing to be shrouded in a corner, but those young people occasionally look over. Where exactly did the bottom leak? Li Shan frowned and thought for a moment, then turned his head to look at the singer beside him who was pouring wine for him. Although he was a bit young, his features were picturesque, his demeanor was graceful, and there was a hint of seduction between his words and smiles. He was really a little fairy. In a similar situation in his previous life, he had experienced it with his mentor. Li Shan threw a gentle smile over there and casually hugged the waist of the little fairy, exerting a slight force on his hands. Suddenly, a drum noise came from outside, and a young man walked in quickly and spoke. Li Xiantong and Wang Xiaojiu were killed in battle, and Dingzhou, Qizhou, and Jizhou all fell. When the hall ascended, there was silence. After a moment, someone shouted in a panicked tone, "Saint, let the king of Qin strike it." Difficult, difficult, difficult. The young man who just came in to report the news shook his head and said, "For months since Lu Haida started his army, Huayan King and Yuzhou Luo Yi have both been defeated, and the military strength in Guanzhong is insufficient. However, Zhao Junwang led the army to attack and destroy Shaoyang. Now we should go over the Nanling mountain to pacify Lingnan. Insufficient military strength. No wonder the sage intentionally dismantled the Guanzhong temple. Brother Wang, don't worry, the Wang family in Taiyuan. Princess Pingyang will always guard Wei's pass, Taiyuan is worry-free." After more than an hour of tinkering, Li Shan finally heard some useful news. He squinted his eyes and lowered his head to look at the wine cup on the table, his right hand slowly caressing it, and the low murmur of the singer came from his ear. After listening for a while, Li Shan finally figured out the origin of this young man. Wang Renyu, the legitimate descendant of the Wang family in Taiyuan, and his uncle Wang Yushang, Princess Tongan, were the brother-in-law of the sage Li Yuan. Wang Renyu came from a prestigious family and was also loved by Wang Yu and Princess Tongan. Although his temperament was not arrogant, he was very promiscuous. He spread the news he had just heard widely, but soon forgot about the war and began to recite poetry and prose. In terms of this generation, with Brother Wang present, who dares to say that poetry and literature surpass them? Looking at the paper and ink on the other side, the singer beside her was blowing like orchids, Lang Jun. Li Shan smiled slightly, got up and swung it away. The singer fixed her eyes on it, covered her cherry lips, and carried the paper inside. The sound of the pipa behind the curtain, mixed with a few jigu, paused for a moment before the music stopped. Accompanied by the serene Chiba, a woman raised her voice and sang, "The jade is made up into a tree high, with thousands of green silk tapers hanging down. I wonder who cut the fine leaves, and the spring breeze in February is like scissors." Lang Jun. The little fairy entangled again, "I also want." Li Shan extended his right hand, and the little fairy took the initiative to put on her waist, casually asking, "Do you have a name?" "My servant Lotus, my nickname is Xiaoman." Li Shan chuckled and said, "Cherry hibiscus mouth, willow small waist." At this moment, the singing had stopped, and one person sighed, "This poem sings of spring, not weaker than Shui Silly." "That's natural, drinking He Zhizhang, one of the 8 immortals, is no worse than Shui Daoheng." A young scholar glanced at Wang Renyu and followed this sentence to open up the topic. Unfortunately, Shui Silly was the 5th son, and the Bo Bao brother who could carry on his aspiration succeeded his clan brother. A blessing in disguise is not a blessing in disguise. Brother Bo Bao is now the chief clerk of the Tian's mansion, and he is in high spirits. Wang Renyu's face stiffened a bit, and he arched his hand and forced a smile, saying, "Who is this masterpiece?" After everyone looked left and right, their gaze coincidentally turned to the corner. Apart from them, there was only the little white face in the hall that made them jealous. But Li Shan, who had been sitting in the corner all along, had quietly left. The little man was still sitting there, looking at the door with a reluctant expression, causing everyone's teeth to ache. Strolling around Kangfang casually, a large amount of information was systematically arranged in Li Shan's mind. After he sorted out his thoughts, he couldn't help but sigh. It was a bit difficult to handle. Although it cannot be confirmed, Li Shan believes that even if it is not a close relationship, there is at least 50.6% certainty. Regarding the decision to abolish the temple, it is likely not due to Li Yuan's sudden personal beliefs, but rather carries obvious political implications. Do Jianda was only beheaded, and Lu Haida reignited. He traversed Hebei and his army was almost invincible. Li Shaogong led a large army in Jiangnan and even Lingnan, and due to insufficient troops in Guangzhou, he chose to abolish temples to supplement his army. Don't be fooled by the fact that it's just a temple being abolished. Dongshan Temple is just a small temple, with only over 30 monks in total. However, if it were to be abolished, Jijiagu would be included in the list, and Zhichong Prefecture could draw at least 100 soldiers. Temples like Guangzhou are everywhere. Li Shan smacked his lips. It's really tough, but is it okay to just leave it at that? The mother and son lived together in Jijiagu. Although most villagers despised Li Shan, they always showed great respect to the Zhu family. Moreover, Li Shan remembered that Lu Haida was a skilled fighter, and many famous generals in the early Tang Dynasty were defeated by him. It seems that Luo Shixin died in this battle. Leaving Kangfang with a worried expression, Li Shan found Zhu Ba, who refused to accompany him to the brothel, and found a pharmacy. So much. The guy looked at Zhu Ba in surprise. Where's the prescription? Li Shan blinked beside him and said, you can't buy or sell without a prescription. This is not. The waiter hesitated for a moment and turned to look at the pharmacy owner, who walked over and asked a few words. 2 pounds. Who wants it? Li Shan glanced at Zhu Ba, who straightened his chest and said, I want to buy plaster for medicinal purposes. The shopkeeper's mouth was a bit crooked and his expression was a bit strange. He pointed to the waiter to get the medicine. The assistant on the side came out carrying a bag, and the shopkeeper murmured softly, no wonder the sage wants to abolish the temple. People's hearts are not ancient. Seeing Li Shan's curious expression, the shopkeeper whispered, using such a large dose of plaster must be lactation-inducing. Urge. What? The shopkeeper spoke clearly and said, as recorded in the Shenong Benchao Jing, gypsum has a cold nature and is mainly used for cold and heat in the middle wind. It can cause adverse reactions in the heart, wheezing, dry mouth and tongue, inability to rest, abdominal pain, lactation, and golden sores. However, at such a dosage, it must be lactation. Li Shan, who had been drinking a bit too much just now, hiccuped and tried to say something with a dry smile, but in the end, he didn't say anything. This pot has already been carried by someone. Chapter 5. Instinct. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jijiagu is located on the north side of Chang'an City, adjacent to the Jing River and nestled by mountains and rivers. Although there is little fertile land, the villagers are still barely able to make ends meet because the entrusted temples do not pay taxes. So, which generation did your great-grandfather settle in the village? Li Shan deliberately inquired about the inside story of Jijiagu. It should be noted that Li Du was sent to Lingnan, but flipping through the memories of his predecessor, his mother Zhu was from Lingnan and even had an elder brother in Lingnan. Zhu Ba casually said, I heard my grandfather say that there was great chaos in the world at that time. The Zhu family moved from Luoyang to Chang'an, but in fact, the Zhu family was originally from Guangzhou. Li Shan pondered in his heart but didn't find any clues. At this moment, the two had already entered the village. In the narrow village, people were greeting him from time to time, but they were all greeting Zhu Ba and turning a blind eye to Li Shan. Obviously, Li Shan had left a bad impression on the villagers a few days ago. Ouch! Cold Buting got a hit on his buttocks, and Li Shan turned his head to look over. An 8 or 9-year-old child suddenly stabbed him with a wooden stick in his hand, which was quite decent. With a dull sound and quick eyesight, Zhu Ba blocked the head of the stick with a bag filled with plaster and cursed, "Little stone, what's wrong?" The young woman carrying a bucket on the side pouted and said, "I went down the mountain early in the morning, and I only came back now. It is said that the Li family leader has gone to the city." The crowd of onlookers suddenly spoke a lot of gossip, mixed with a few words of criticism. "They will eat lamb soup cakes in the future, why would they stay here? Didn't that mean that person doesn't recognize this son?" "Not necessarily, maybe he'll hang himself outside the Pei mansion again today. I only pity Lady Zhu." Li Shan listened silently, realizing that his reputation in the village was so bad. He tried every means to leave his mother and enjoy wealth, and even children looked down on him. Nowadays, the imperial examination system has not yet been fully developed, and the virtue of filial piety is highly recognized in both officialdom and the public. Moreover, although her mother Zhu has only been in the village for over half a month, she is straightforward, enthusiastic, and highly praised. At this moment, suddenly a mournful shout came from a distance, and 7 or 8 people ran over with door panels, followed by several women crying, "What's going on? Stone, stone, your dad has an accident." Just now, while stabbing Li Shan's child with a stick and crying, he rushed over and said, "Daddy, Daddy. Uncle Ba, help me. Uncle Ba, hurry up and invite the doctor." Zhujiagu has no 2 surnames, and the clan leader Zhu Wei, the older generation, ranks 8th. With a grim face, he looked at the man on the door panel and stomped his foot, cursing, "It's already winter, and there are no birds or beasts. What are you doing up the mountain?" Outside the crowd, Zhu Ba, who was biting his lips, explained to Li Shan in a low voice. On the door was his cousin Zhu Jie, who made a living by hunting. A few days ago, his children were greedy, and his father wanted to go up the mountain to try his luck. However, he accidentally rolled off the mountain and was pierced in the chest by a sharp branch. Li Shan squinted his eyes and only looked for a moment. The branch had been removed and the bleeding had stopped. If there was no infection, the problem should not be serious. This thought had just appeared when the man on the door suddenly opened his mouth and breathed hard, his face quickly turning blue and purple. The scalp was tingling, and something spontaneous and coercive appeared in Li Shan's mind. Without hesitation, he grabbed Zhu Ba and pulled out a small knife from his boots. "Find a towel or cloth, be sure it's clean," he said, "hurry up and go." In just a few words, Zhu Jia on the door panel was already sweating profusely, desperate like a fish thrown ashore. The villagers next to him were crying, wailing, and silently shedding tears, unable to do anything. When Zhu Wei was young, he fought on the battlefield and knew at a glance that he was hopeless. Not to mention that the doctor didn't have time to come, even if he did, he couldn't save him. At this moment, a huge force came from the side, and one arm suddenly swept him away. At this moment, driven by instinct, doctors will transform. Li Shan, with a stern expression on his face, tore open the man's clothes, leaned over and pressed his ear against it. His middle finger curled up and lightly tapped on his chest. "Li Jia Lang, what are you going to do? Don't touch him. He has a knife in his hand." A man swung a stick and was about to chop it off. Suddenly, Li Shan stood up and let out a fierce roar. "Shut up, everyone." There was silence all around, and before they could react, Li Shan crouched down and touched the injured person's ribs with his hand. He gritted his teeth and raised his small knife, stabbing it fiercely. Hiss. Amidst the screams of others, a slight hissing sound reached his ears. Li Shan sat down and did a simple physical examination before decisively taking action. It was too risky, but fortunately, it was indeed tension pneumothorax. For Li Shan, who used to work shifts in the emergency department, this is both a doctor's instinct and a doctor's responsibility. The sound of a woman crying came from beside, and Li Shan was too lazy to pay attention. His ear was pressed against the injured person's chest, listening to a slight hissing sound, and he tried to pull out the small knife. In this era, there is no needle. It can only be like this. The most practical plan for Li Shan's conditional launch is to have an infection, but it is always better than waiting for death. The woman's crying had not stopped, but everyone else fell silent. Everyone's eyes were not blind again. After the small knife pierced in, Zhu Jia on the door panel quickly improved, his face slightly faded, and his complexion looked much better. Most importantly, his breathing gradually eased. "De Lang, how are you?" Zhu Wei, who was quite old, crouched down and asked cautiously. "Shut up." Li Shanxuan rebuked for a moment before saying without hesitation, "Ask someone to find a bamboo, as thin as possible, and then let someone boil water. If it needs to boil, leave it here and don't move." "Okay, okay." "Ask someone to bring another basin of water, hurry up." "Okay, okay, go ahead." After swallowing his saliva, Li Shan carefully pulled out his small knife and pressed it to stop the bleeding while shouting, "Where's Zhu Ba? He hasn't come back yet." "Here, here." Zhu Ba jumped high outside the crowd and looked inside. "What is this?" Li Shan muttered casually and took a piece of red cloth to start wrapping. Yu reading www.uukangshu.net confirming that the injured person was still alive. Li Shankai stood up and swayed slightly. Zhu Ba and Zhu Wei beside him reached out to help him. "We can only come here and try again later," Li Shan whispered. "We can survive, but we can't. It's already a great kindness to save lives." Zhu Wei said decisively, "If it weren't for De Lang's help, it would have been in vain by now." "Not bad." The middle-aged man who rushed to the side raised his voice and said, "Regardless of life or death, the Zhu family is grateful." Zhu Wei pointed to the woman kneeling by the door panel and said, "If the young man doesn't take action, your husband's life or death is not his concern. You need to know this truth." The woman with pear blossoms and rain had not yet had a chance to speak. Before, she poked Li Shan's small stone with a stick and took 2 steps forward. She knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Li Shan to thank him, everyone making a noise. Li Shan quickly pulled up the child, and his forehead was already bruised and swollen. "Don't rush to say thank you, just wait a little longer." Half an hour later, Li Shan made a hollow and thin bamboo tube to try to expel the gas from the chest cavity. Without any convenient tools or instruments, he could only do this step. Whether he could survive the next infection depends on his physical condition. At this moment, the doctor finally arrived, looked at the injuries, listened to the villagers' stories, and sighed at Zhu Jia's luck before taking out a box of ointment. Although he also studied traditional Chinese medicine during his university years, Li Shan was really able to only cooperate with medication, thinking that existence is reasonable. Removing the red cloth, Li Shan felt a bit strange. He turned his head and saw that the villagers who had just been respectful looked eerie. Li Shan blinked and shook off the cloth in his hand. Even though he had a good mental state, he couldn't help but shake his hands and turn to look at Zhu Ba. "Let you find a clean piece of cloth, did you give me a belly bag?" Chapter 6. Seeking Bean Sacks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The small room was packed to the brim, with not only a dozen or so people crowded in, but also various gifts from the villagers placed on the table and ground. Even 2 hens were outside, giggling. The doctors in the village are entitled to such treatment. Yesterday, Zhu Jia was carried back to be on the brink of death, and today he can speak. Li Shan thought to himself that in the era without antibiotics, people's physical fitness may be stronger. Sitting in the main seat, Zhu smiled and chatted with everyone, occasionally mentioning. In his early years, he taught his son to prioritize righteousness. If he refused to save him on the way, it would be unjust. A young man beside him smiled and said, "De Lang, have you returned that belly bag from yesterday?" The room burst into laughter, and the head of the clan, Zhu Wei, couldn't help but laugh uncontrollably. Li Shan shook the pot and said, "It's Zhu Ba." Zhu Ba, standing by the door, immediately interrupted loudly, "You asked me to go get it." Li Shan was laughing angrily and was about to tear it apart when a small round light brain suddenly emerged from outside the door. The little monk tugged at Li Shan's clothes and blinked his eyes, asking, "Daolong, what did Brother Ba say you went to Kangfang yesterday?" After a moment of silence in the room, there was another burst of laughter. Zhu Wei suppressed his laughter and kicked everyone out, saying to Zhu, "Your Highness is also 16. With his status, it's hard to say he's married. Why don't we take a concubine first?" Zhu was a bit moved and glanced at Li Shan. Li Shan shrugged nonchalantly and said, "Marry a wife, marry virtue, and take concubines and women." "Then let's pick 2 maids first," said Zhu with a clapper. "That little fairy from Kangfang is quite good, but Li Shan feels a bit regretful. Unfortunately, it's from the Education Bureau, and he doesn't have the ability to make it himself." After chatting for a while, Zhu Wei's face showed a worried expression and he said, "I heard today that if Dongshan Temple is abolished, the head of the entrusted farmland household will need to send troops to support the government and pay taxes for 4 years. 4 years of tax." Zhu laughed back angrily, "But after 4 or 5 years, all the wheat and corn in the Shijing treasury have been used up." The room fell silent for a moment before Zhu spoke up, "It's really not possible." "I'll go then." "How many households in Jijiagu can he manage?" Zhu Wei shook his head and said, "If you don't want to. When the war stops, go back to Lingnan." Zhu cut off the railway with his nails and said, "Don't go back to Lingnan." On the side, Li Shan flipped the soybeans from his left hand to his right hand, then flipped them back to his left hand. His ears were pointed, and his mother and Zhu Wei wouldn't say these words in front of his predecessor. "De Lang." Li Shan gave his mother a gentle smile and said, "The child knows they were wrong before and will listen to their mother from now on." Zhu showed a satisfied smile, and for a woman who had lost her husband, her son was her only reliance. However, Li Shan does not want to return to Lingnan. "You should know that this is Chang'an, the Chang'an of the Tang Dynasty, the Chang'an of poetry and wine, the Chang'an of the 9 heavens, the palace of the 9 heavens, and the Chang'an of all nations worshipping the imperial robes and crowns. This is Chang'an before Zhongguan, which is about to begin the governance of Zhongguan, and Chang'an, which is about to conquer the world and dominate the Tang Dynasty's capital. I will only return to Lingnan when my mind is flooded." What does Lingnan exist today? Until the Northern Song Dynasty, Lingnan was still the main location for exiled officials and prisoners, similar to the Ninggu Pagoda of the Qing Dynasty. Eating 300 lychees a day, I will not hesitate to grow up and become a native of Lingnan. Later generations thought that Su Shi was praising Lingnan. I don't know when to verify it yet, but it's not the top 10 virtues. It said that he's a high-ranking monk from another place with the Dharma name Xuanzang. Zhu Wei left with these words and stood up. Li Shan grinned and turned out to be his younger brother. The mother and son sat opposite each other. There were 2 bowls of congee on the table. It was yellow, orange and orange. It looked like millet, but actually it was millet, one of the most important grains in Guangzhou in this era. Stay in Chang'an and don't climb the pay gate. Since Li Shan made such a promise last night, Zhu's face has gradually warmed up, but when Li Shan casually mentioned doing some business and making some money, Zhu's face turned ugly again. Cannot engage in business. Zhu cut off the railway with his nails. Once engaged in business, it will be difficult to enter the officialdom in the future. Seeing Li Shan's bewildered appearance, Zhu snorted coldly and said, Pei Shi from Hedong is so famous. If he can't stand out, how can he aspire to success in the future? Li Shan, who understood, smiled and advised, Mother, he will take his own path, let's take our own wooden bridge, and the well water will not cross the river. Zhu patted the table and shouted, Can you bear this breath? The heart seemed to curl up, and a wave of hatred surged in his heart. This was caused by his own body, and Li Shan tried to suppress this emotion. When he lacked strength, any act or even thought of revenge was foolish. In his past life, Li Shan's best friend once said, after getting drunk, that you had chosen the wrong name and kept talking about being kind to others, but in reality, it was an old silver coin. Over there, Zhu kept scolding the Pei family in Lidu, and talked about settling in Jijiagu and purchasing land after the temple was abolished. This was a good opportunity for the mother and son to settle in Guangzhou. Now that the Central Plains have been settled, but Hebei is in turmoil and the border is difficult to settle, it is the time to make achievements and make achievements. Mother, I am an only child. Li Shan was a bit restless, and the military system did not select an only child. In this era, even a cold can make me cry, making me fight. What about the Tang poems I remember? Heroes are useless. It doesn't matter, we won't go out with government troops then. Zhu looked very confident. Pei Shiju is already old, and there are no talented or famous descendants. It's extremely difficult for Li Du to climb to a high position. Li Shan sighed and said that the old lady was determined to pour water on the unfaithful man. After finishing a meal, Li Shan asked about the closure of the temple again. Zhu impatiently casually said a few words and said, if the temple is closed, 4 years of tax will need to be paid. Zhu is a bit embarrassed. If he wants to settle down in Jijiagu, he must pay taxes for 4 years with the villagers. Otherwise, it is difficult to cross the registered residence line. But on the way north, he has used almost all his money. Li Shan, as a traveler, has a solution to this point. Mr. Li from the Li family. Outside came Zhu Ba's shout, and Li Shan greeted him with a smile. Is it all finished grinding? Here, it's all in the bucket. Li Shan squatted down and smelled it. It was a strong smell of soybean milk, but it was a little fishy. It doesn't matter, it will be ready after boiling. Dalong, what is this? The little monk who emerged from somewhere grabbed Li Shan's sleeve. I'll let you taste it later. Li Shan was a bit worried. The little monk was like 100,000 wise, asking everything he encountered and not choosing the occasion. Li Shan was born without a mother in his past life, and before he reached the age of 1, he lost his father. With only his grandparents, he couldn't survive farming and relied on a tofu workshop to barely make a living. He was naturally familiar with making tofu. Although suitable brine cannot be obtained, gypsum can still be used, but try adjusting the proportion. Mute uncle, keep your fire down. The mute uncle behind the stove pulled out 2 sticks of wood. He was the old servant who had hung Li Shan that day. He was naturally mute, and Zhu Shi went north to Chang'an with 5 servants. 4 of them followed Li Du and ran away, leaving only the mute uncle behind. Pour out the plaster and stir it evenly with a spoon. Li Shan carefully watched the soybean milk in the pot gradually solidify. He picked up a spoon and scooped it up. Less. This is bean curd jelly served with sauce. Today in Chang'an City, besides Kangfang, Li Shan specifically went around the east-west market and inquired about it before choosing to buy plaster. Although the legend of tofu was invented by the king of Huainan during the Western Han Dynasty, it has not yet spread in the Tang Dynasty. This thing is not expensive, but it is not difficult to earn the first bucket of gold in a short period of time with it. Anyway, Li Shan didn't intend to make a fortune with tofu. Looking at the bean curd jelly served with sauce in the pot, Li Shan pondered it and wanted to have a try first. There was no soy sauce, so I added some soy sauce. At this time, salt was still very valuable. Instead of adding it, I added a little vinegar and took out 3 small bowls of bean curd jelly served with sauce. Eat. Mother Zhu and Zhu Ba were both a bit hesitant, except for the little monk who took 2 big sips with his eyes wide and round. It's so slippery. After a moment, all 3 small bowls were clean. What is this? Where did De Lang learn it from? Li Shan tilted his head for a moment, touched the little monk's bald head, and smiled. This is Qiong Yao Jiang. If this item is sold in the east-west market. Li Shan whispered, touching his chin. Zhu silently stared at the seemingly unrecognized son and suddenly spoke, go and invite Uncle 7, Uncle 5, and Uncle 6 to come over. Feeling a strange atmosphere, Zhu Sange and the little monk walked away. Mother. This item can earn some money, but we can't sell it ourselves. Zhu Ba can help, call on a few more, after all, we need to grind tofu. Do you think what would have happened if our mother and son had not been taken in by Jijiago when we went north to Chang'an and encountered unforeseen circumstances? Mother's meaning is. Dalong, you did the right thing yesterday, why can't you think of it today? People stand in the world, putting righteousness first. When Zhu strode out towards Zhu Wei and others, Li Shan suddenly woke up and extended his helpless hand towards the door. Begging for a bean sack. Chapter 7. Household Exclusion Calculation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As a lonely student from a poor family in his childhood, Li Shan maintained his image of being a kind, hard-working, and kind person, but he always had the characteristic of being a miser. Watching Zhu generously share the first bucket of gold with over 200 households in the village to solve the possible 4-year tax payment, Li Shan showed a gentle smile to everyone, saying that this is where righteousness lies. In this era, although the social class is almost solidified, righteousness is a hard currency, whether in the upper or middle and lower classes. With the name of righteousness, wherever you go, others will look up, which is also the main reason for Zhu's generosity. Without the name of righteousness, where can Do Jianda win the support of the wealthy in Hebei? At the end of the day, almost every household came to pay their respects. As we all know, if we really need to pay the 4-year tax, besides selling houses and fields, we may also have to sell children and women. If the male soldiers of the family go on a military expedition and die, then that family is considered to be gone. When everyone was panicked, Li Shan generously contributed such a secret recipe. It was both heartfelt and righteous. This secret recipe, in the words of Chibwa, is a treasure that can be passed down. In addition, with the righteous act of rescuing Zhu Jia yesterday, Li Shan's reputation was completely washed away through the joint efforts of himself and his mother Zhu. When facing the gratitude of 7th Uncle Zhu Wei, Li Shan wore a smile on his face, but his heart was as sharp as a knife and his heart was as dead as ashes as a traveler. Some have the ability to mine the first bucket of gold. No big deal, just change the bucket. But can I change my mother? Li Shan chose tofu as his starting point after careful consideration. On the one hand, he was familiar with the industry, on the other hand, he realized that tofu was not popular in the Tang Dynasty, and more importantly, he realized that soybeans were not valuable. Almost every household in the village stores soybeans because compared to other vegetables, soybeans are easier to store for a long time, and the planting period of soybeans is short. The main way to eat soybeans is through bean rice, which even ordinary people do not like and can only satisfy their hunger. The villagers in Jijiago mainly store soybeans as fermented soybean. So, soybeans are very affordable nowadays. With so many people in Jijiago, so many cheap soybeans, and the novelty of soy products, Li Shan quickly gathered the first bucket of gold. As a high school and college student who used scholarships and poverty alleviation to pay tuition fees and make ends meet, Li Shan's pockets were empty, giving him the illusion of being in a precarious situation. In the room, Zhu Shi and Zhu Wei sat at the top, and Li Shan, Zhu Ba and a middle-aged man sat at the bottom. The little monk was still drinking soybean milk with a bowl in his arms. It was neither sweet nor salty, and I don't know how he could drink so much. The middle-aged man is Zhu Qi, Zhu Wei's eldest son. He often goes to the east and west markets as a peddler. Today, he and Zhu Ba take bean curd jelly served with sauce. No, Qiong Yao Jiang to the city to ask for the price. Zhu Qi excitedly said, take it to the young master and show it to the tavern. It's worth a bowl of it. Cough, cough. Zhu Wei coughed twice to remind his son. 1 penny. Li Shan didn't seem to hear anything, only a little confused about the price. What price range is this? Zhu Qi explained a few words. After the establishment of the Tang Dynasty, the 5 Zhu coins were abolished and a new Kaiyuan Tongbao was minted. 1 coin is 1 yuan, which may not sound like much, but in reality. Nowadays, the dummy coin is only 4 coins. In the Tang Dynasty, 1 dou is equivalent to 12.5 jin in later generations, which means that the price of rice is about 3 jin or more for 1 yuan, which is about 10 yuan or more in later generations. Too little, isn't it? Li Shan was a bit dissatisfied. The price is so low. 218 households in the village have to pay for years' worth of taxes. Is that enough? In Li Shan's view, this is a quick sum of money that is difficult to keep confidential, and the price is not high. This first bucket of gold is a bit shabby. Zhu Qi shook his finger and said, there are 218 households in the village, with 327 ding men. Each ding man needs to pay 2 stones of corn, 3 coins for 1 stone of corn, and another 2 zhang of silk and 3 liang of cotton per household. Each piece of silk is used for rice, and 1 jin of cotton is used for half a bucket of rice. Zhu Qi was still holding his finger, while Li Shan had already calculated in his mind, every year, Ding Nan needs to pay a total of 1,962 yuan, and each household needs to pay a total of 654 yuan equivalent to silk and cotton, which is 2,616 yuan together. A total of 4 years, that's 10,464 yuan, which is 10 guan and 464 yuan. A bowl of Qiongniao milk is only sold for 1 yuan, and 100 bowls are sold per day. After deducting the cost, if a profit of 70 yuan is obtained, it will take 150 days. If we really want to pay the 4-year tax, will the government wait for 150 days? Zhu Wei and his son both stared at Li Shan in astonishment. In this era, such arithmetic can go to take the imperial examination. Apart from everything else, the calculation subject is safe. Li Shan himself didn't think much of it and was still pondering in his heart, it's not possible to pay the 4-year tax, but we can't help but be cautious. Uncle Qi, what if I can prevent the temple from being abolished? Really, if we pay 4 years' worth of taxes, the taxes will be fine, taxes. Li Shan whispered, yesterday in the city, I heard that Lu Haida in Hebei had defeated the Tang army, and Dingzhou, Qizhou, and Jizhou had all fallen. The meaning of this sentence is very simple. If a temple is abolished, regardless of whether Jijiago sends out 100 soldiers or performs corvée labor, it is highly likely that they will go to Hebei, with more misfortune than good. Zhu Wei turned around twice and waved his hand, shouting, call someone here, it's all up to the gentleman. 2/4 of an hour later, Li Shan, Zhu Wei, and others climbed the mountain and entered the temple. The former circled around the temple, causing the dozens of monks and accompanying villagers to wander around. The ground has been swept clean. Just that pit, go to the river and fill it with some gravel. Bring more crushed stones, reading www.uukangshu.net anyway, there are many by the Jing River, so pave the mountain road outside. Hey, haven't you put away the preserved meat on the wall yet? What's wrong with keeping this chicken feather here? Mute uncle, take it back and make a chicken feather duster. Zhu Wei looked at this scene inexplicably, is that all? Of course not. Li Shan crossed his hands and reached into his sleeve. Firstly, there are no Buddhist scriptures in the temple, it's just a joke. It's gone a long time ago. Uncle Zhu Lu, who was still smiling at Li Shan the day before yesterday, was particularly attentive today. Zhu Jie, who was rescued by Li Shan, was his eldest son. Is there a pen, ink, paper, and inkstone in the village? Have Li Shan's grandfather in his past life believed in Buddhism, but he did not believe in Buddhism himself. However, he was not unfamiliar with Buddhist scriptures. Before crossing time, he was still reciting Buddhist scriptures to seek peace of mind, but he did not know if those few books have been published now. Secondly, it is necessary for senior monks who are proficient in Buddhism to sit in their seats, and for senior monks to visit, it is necessary to discuss Buddhism. Uncle Zhu Lu waved his hand dejectedly and said, "If there are old monks who are proficient in Buddhism, are you afraid that the temple will be abolished?" Li Shan pondered in his heart that he couldn't go to battle himself. The 16-year-old young host was too fake, and he shaved his head, which was chilly in winter. By calculation, Tang Sanzang is not very old now. I remember he only set off to the west during the Xinguan period. After all, he is an imperial brother. At this time, he should have had a great interest in the scriptures passed down from India. However, presenting only scriptures without discussing Buddhism with senior monks seems a bit light in weight. After turning in place twice, Li Shan saw the mute uncle who was helping outside. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he said, "Mute uncle, I'll arrange a good job for you." "What is this called?" "This is called the Household Extinction Plan. See how you discuss Buddhism." Chapter 8. Provoking Emotions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The light snow cleared at first, and the mountains remained white. A group of visitors walked along the mountain road with creaking wooden clogs to enjoy the scenery. Occasionally, mischievous squirrels flew back and forth in the forest, causing the snow on the pine trees to rustle down, which was quite amusing. Although Dongshan Temple is a small temple and not famous for its monks, it has been established for 200 years. Unexpectedly, today. Upon hearing this, the gaze of a young monk walking in the middle fell at his feet. This was a mountain road paved with pebbles, obviously newly built. After taking 2 turns, a wide-open temple gate can be seen halfway up the mountain. The ignorant guest monk and the group, holding their own identities, walked straight inside and circled around, only to see 3 or 2 monks clearing the snow. Where did the distinguished guest come from? A childish question sounded behind everyone, and the young monk turned his head to look. A little monk tilted his head curiously and looked over. "Poor monk Xuanzang, come to pay respects to the abbot of your temple." The monk crouched down and smiled gently, "Would you like to take me there?" After thinking for a while, the little monk nodded and ran along the way, leading everyone to a courtyard outside. Wrong, wrong. The rumor that temples will be abolished and 4 years' taxes will be paid is just baseless. A clear voice rang out in the courtyard, "Someone should be able to release a message of forcing the payment of 4 years of taxes, and then cut them after the temple is abolished. This will greatly reduce the resentment." Although it's a bit eerie, examining people's hearts is not an ordinary method. Everyone outside looked at each other, some frowned, some lowered their heads, some smiled lightly, and finally a middle-aged man coughed loudly with a gloomy face. Crunch. The young monk pushed open the door and saluted in surprise, "You are poor monk Xuanzang, entrusted to pay respects to the abbot of your temple." Xuanzang's gaze involuntarily fell on the young man 10 steps away. This is a handsome and unparalleled young man, dressed in a cloth robe, but with a tall and straight figure, a high nose bridge, and flying temples. There is still snow around, and the chill does not diminish. However, the young man arches his hands with courtesy, a smile like spring, and a warm jade. A moment of gibberish, disturbing everyone. "I apologize here, young man." Li Shan saluted calmly. "Who are you?" The young man chuckled and stood out, "Your methods are cunning. Although you speak well, you have already offended someone." Behind the young man, everyone looked eerie, and the middle-aged man even stretched his face. Little Li Shan, who came to Chang'an to visit relatives for several months, was unexpectedly rejected. Li Shan's smile remained unchanged. In a moment of impatience, he committed suicide by hanging a beam. The elders sent him here, hoping to use Buddhism to resolve his anger and poison. Xuanzang bowed in unison, "What is anger?" It is said that the harm caused by emotions and pleasure is human nature. Li Shan sighed, the three poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance harm the body and mind. Sinking and reincarnation are the origin of evil. After a moment of silence, Xuanzang whispered, "Please see the host." Li Shan remained expressionless and led the way, but in his heart he was cursing, coming to investigate without prior notice. What he hated the most in his past life was the superior's sudden inspection of such a terrible situation. Leaving the courtyard in front, Xuanzang, the young man, and the middle-aged man with a black face followed behind Li Shan and entered the small hall. The young man casually looked up and saw a picture of words hanging on the wall. He stopped and said, "The body is like a Bodhi tree, and the heart is like a mirror stand. Always brush it off and don't let it get stained with dust." After only one glance, Xuanzang withdrew his gaze and looked at Li Shan, hosting the practice inside the house. "Yes. Please guide the way." After walking more than 10 steps forward, the middle-aged man was surprised to see another painting hanging on the wall. Bodhi has no tree, and the mirror is not a platform. There is nothing in it, where can dust be stained? The young man frowned and pondered, sighing lightly, "Brother Kemming, these two verses have a great Zen meaning." As he pushed the door in to report, Li Shan glanced at Xuanzang with the corner of his eye. Well, this trick is completely useless to Xuanzang, he didn't even move his eyelids. The two of them had some insights from the outside, but Xuanzang walked straight inside and saw a withered old monk sitting cross-legged. He bowed and said, "Poor monk Xuanzang, a monk from the Pure Land Temple in Luoyang, has not consulted the abbot." The old monk nodded to signal, but turned his head to look at Li Shan. "The abbot's Dharma name is Wuchao," Li Shan whispered. "Many years ago, the Zen master settled at Dongshan Temple. Since then, he has been practicing closed-mouth meditation and has been silent for 10 years. Xuanzang, who had always had a faint expression, paused for a moment. How could he discuss Buddhism when he practiced closed-mouth meditation? Regardless of Buddhism, how to verify it? How do we know if this temple should be abolished? As a Buddhist disciple, Xuanzang was naturally dissatisfied with the sage's order to demolish temples, but he encountered this tough issue when choosing the first one. Xuanzang remained silent for a moment, saying, "To reduce one's speech, eliminate sins and avoid disasters, one often signs a wooden sign prohibiting speech, and has not heard of 10 years of silence." "The mouth is the gateway to the heart," Li Shan said softly. "When this mouth is closed, all sounds are victorious. When this heart sinks, all things are lovely." Seeing Xuanzang lost in thought, Li Shan handed over the 2 prepared booklets and said, "These are the records of a Zen master many years ago, and there are still copied scriptures." Xuanzang flipped over and looked at it a few times before suddenly changing his expression. "This Diamond Prajnaparamita Sutra. Why is it different from the translations of Kumarash and Dharmagupta?" Li Shan breathed a sigh of relief silently, and it was indeed effective. The Mahaprajnaparamita Heart Sutra also differs greatly from the translation of Kumarash. "Zen master, where did these scriptures come from?" Before entering the house, Xuanzang didn't say he was as cold as frost, but he also showed indifference to others. At this moment, his heart was burning with anxiety and his face was flushed. "Ah, Buddhist." In Xuanzang's fervent gaze, there was a hint of relief on Zen Master Wuchao's emaciated old face. He gently raised his hand, extended his index finger, and felt a little empty. Yu reading www.uukangshu.net, Master Zen, what does this mean? Xuanzang was taken aback for a moment, and when he asked again, Master Wuchao had already closed his eyes. "Li Gongzi, what does Zen Master mean?" Li Shan blinked and shook his head after thinking for a while, wondering if Tang Sanzang was foolish. "Isn't this obvious? You also have to pay for a pair of shoes, you just want to know the origin of the scriptures without giving anything." When Xuanzang, who was at a loss, walked out of the door, both of them were surprised. Although the monk in front of him was young, he was recommended by the 10 virtues and had a good reputation in the Buddhist world. He had a wide range of knowledge, but when he entered for a moment, he was so embarrassed. "Zen master, how is it?" the young man couldn't help but ask. Xuanzang nodded first, then shook his head and extended his index finger in the air. Suddenly, he felt lost in thought and said, "This is south. Oh, I was inside the house just now. That's she." Li Shan quickly hammered the nail. "She means. It's from India." Xuanzang was in high spirits. "It must be a true scripture from India." "Well, you guessed it yourself, it has nothing to do with us." Next, Li Shan accompanied Xuanzang all the way to the foot of the mountain, but did not hear any hint from the other party. As Li Shanxin watched the carriage leave, he wondered if today's performance was a success or a failure. Xuanzang must have set out to the west during the Zhongguan period, and now he has only been in the 4th year of Wude. In theory, he should be very interested in the scriptures transmitted from India. Li Shan couldn't help but speculate, did the monk already have the intention to go west to seek scriptures? Since the first solution could not be solved, the alternative solution could only be used. Li Shan waved to Zhu Ba and said, "Are you ready?" "I was already prepared and had someone follow me. I knew where the monk was staying at night." Chapter 9. To Die. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the early morning, the doors of various neighborhoods in Chang'an City were opened and released, causing a stir in the hearts of the people. The noise was incessant, and residents near Yongyang and Heping neighborhoods could hear the faint sound of bells whispering in their ears. Although today's sages respect the way and suppress Buddhism, for hundreds of years before the collapse of the world, Buddhism had an unimaginable influence on all levels of society. The Dezongji Temple, which occupied half of Yongyang Square and half of Heping Square, was ordered to be built by Emperor Wen of Sui Dynasty. It was the work of the great craftsman Yuan Kai, who was in charge of rebuilding the capital of Luoyang. It covers an extremely wide area and has a magnificent Buddhist pagoda that is over 100 meters high, making it a scenic spot for the time. By the early Tang Dynasty, the Grand Master Temple had grown into the top-ranked temple in Ansham, and most monks who came from other places chose to place their orders here. Amidst the faint sound of Buddha bells, Xuanzang, sitting cross-legged on a cushion, slowly opened his eyes. Growing up at the Pure Land Temple in Luoyang, he shaved his head and became a monk at the age of 11, and was able to read the Phahua Sutra proficiently. At the age of 18, he listened to and interpreted the Mahayana Sutra. 3 days later, he ascended to the throne to explain it to other masters, and everyone was amazed by it. At the age of 20, he received the full precepts and traveled all over the world, searching for famous masters. When he returned to Chang'an with his brother, his reputation had already flourished. Xuanzang, even before he began his groundbreaking feat, was already a leader in the Buddhist world of Chang'an. Many high monks openly declared that he was 1,000-mile full of Buddhism. Such a person is naturally qualified to represent the 10 great virtues in assessing the closure of temples, let alone because both emperors of the Sui dynasty believed in Buddhism, and temples of various sizes were everywhere in Guangzhou. The 10 great virtues have been in the flower armor for many years, so there is no such energy. A monk reported that someone wanted to see him outside, and Xuanzang frowned. He had been obsessed with Buddhism since childhood and had no choice but to take on the inspection of the temple, but he did not expect to be implicated in the political vortex. "It's just that, it's better to go west, it's better to go west," Xuanzang murmured in his heart. From yesterday until now, this idea has been hovering in Xuanzang's mind. In the past few years, after traveling around the world and returning to Chang'an, his doubts have become even more intense. The laws and regulations in different regions are different, and the descriptions are different. Until yesterday, Xuanzang suddenly woke up and went west to India to dispel his doubts. In history, Xuanzang was inspired by a Hu monk to make up his mind to travel westward to obtain scriptures, but these thoughts have long been deeply buried in his heart. The monk added, "It's from Dongshan Temple." Xuanzang immediately thought of the handsome young man who was full of energy yesterday and said, "Please come in." In the small guest room, Li Shan stared at Xuanzang, who was looking down and obedient, and smiled, saying, seeing that the Zen master's expression was worried and his eyebrows were not smooth, "I came here today to relieve the Zen master's worries." Since he knew what this fish wanted, Li Shan naturally wouldn't let it unhook. Relieving worries. Xuanzang didn't lift his head inside. Yesterday when he returned to the city, he heard that the Tang army had suffered a great defeat in Hebei. King Huayan and Li Shiji were only spared, and the brothers Shui Wanjun and Shui Wanche were captured. Li Shan was taken aback by the fact that Li Shiji was later the British Duke Li Ji. He remembered the evaluation in the Ziji Tongjian that Li Jing and Li Ji could not be compared to Han, Bai, Wei, and Hua in ancient times. Being able to be compared to Li Jing, Han Xian, Bai Qi, Wei Qing, and Hua Tsubing, but only narrowly avoided defeat, Li Shan's throat twitched, and Lu Haida was so fierce. After a moment of silence, Li Shan said softly, "As a result, our military strength has become increasingly insufficient. It is imperative to abolish the temple, and only Dongshan Temple. Once it is abolished, we will raise 100 soldiers from the government. And Dongshan Temple is the first temple to be inspected. If a Zen master gently lets it go, he is afraid that the sage will not be happy, as the sage already likes the way and dislikes Buddhism. I propose to resign today. Is Zen master really going west?" With such a swift answer, although it was a question, it carried a definite affirmation. Xuanzang finally lifted his head and looked carefully at the young man in front of him. He sighed deeply, "My mind is so clever that I think I entered the donor's net yesterday." Li Shan continued, as if he had not heard of it, starting from Chang'an, heading west to Tianzhu, from Tianshui and Lanzhou, passing through Guazhou and Yuyumen Pass. In the western regions, there are also countries such as Gaochang and Akini, crossing the Broken Leaf City, climbing the Kush Mountain, thousands of miles of Gobi, vast grasslands, and difficult journeys. Regarding his journey to the west, Xuanzang listened attentively. Even if the countries allow passage, they will not be captured by the Turks, nor will they encounter bandits and bandits. It will be difficult to reach them in 3 to 5 years. Moreover, now that the Turks are sometimes heading south, if you return one day, the sages will order you to recount the details of various tribes for military purposes. Would you be willing to do so? Once traveling westward, it is highly likely that it will be difficult to reach India and even more difficult to survive. Xuanzang's expression did not waver at all. "I have a solution," Li Shan said straightforwardly without playing riddles. "Yesterday was indeed a game, but the scriptures did come from India. I can help Zen master arrive in India, but please let Dongshan Temple go." Seeing Xuanzang's skeptical expression, Li Shan chuckled lightly and said, "There is nothing false." Xuanzang lowered his head and gritted his teeth secretly. Just as he was about to speak, a little monk outside the door reported, "A man from Kaiyang County and a scholar named Du are visiting." Xuanzang had just arrived at the door when a question had already come from outside. Yesterday, during the inspection of Dongshan Temple, the Zen master and his abbot discussed Buddhism. What was the result? The speaker was the young man who went with him yesterday. He looked at Xuanzang, who came out and stood at the door, laughing. "However, the 2 verses I saw yesterday are very meaningful. I believe the host is also proficient in Buddhism." The middle-aged man who had been wearing a black face at Dongshan Temple yesterday immediately retorted, "It has already been verified that Dongshan Temple has been occupied by the villagers of Jijiago at the foot of the mountain. None of the monks have mastered Buddhism, and even the abbot has no degree certificate." The 2 of them argued endlessly, while Xuanzang only listened silently, while Li Shan inside was a bit restless. These 2 of them went together yesterday, but listening to this argument, they seemed to have completely opposite attitudes towards the abolition of the temple. In the special period of the Wude era, this gave Li Shan an ominous feeling. It wasn't until the 2 of them became dry-tongued that Xuanzang slowly spoke up, "Master Wuchao of Dongshan Temple, or Wude, may have brought scriptures to the East and made great contributions to Buddhism, which cannot be abolished. The young man's face showed joy, while the middle-aged man was about to speak with a gloomy expression when he saw Xuanzang leaning sideways, revealing a familiar figure inside the room. Li Shan cursed the bald man for his kindness and saluted with a dry smile, saying, "I'm visiting Zen Master today to inquire about this matter." The young man laughed and pointed at Li Shan, saying, "I offended Professor Du twice within 2 days. I'm not afraid." Upon hearing the title, Master Du, Li Shan made an effort to control his already less obedient legs and feet, lowering his head and remaining silent. Seeing this posture, the middle-aged man was only momentarily stunned and immediately realized that he and the young man had the same judgment. Xuanzang remained silent on his return journey yesterday, but now he has given a negative answer. Obviously, Xuanzang's decision must be related to the sudden appearance of this young man. Xuanzang whispered, "The sage issued an edict to inspect the temples in Guangzhou. Those who do not comply will be abolished." The monk was ordered to do so, but Dongshan Temple. The middle-aged man's face looked slightly better as he arched his hand and said, "Half a year ago, during the Central Plains War, the army continued to move south, and it was difficult to immediately recruit the old soldiers from Guangzhou. Now that Hebei is in chaos and the troops are tight, we kindly ask Master Zen to investigate as soon as possible. Although the first temple encountered a nail, if everything goes smoothly, it's just a loss of face." One pulled his face, the other smiled and watched as the two of them left. Xuanzang and Li Shan sat back in the room. "That scholar Du is from the Tian's prefecture." Li Shan's voice was a bit hoarse. The term scholar was a literary attendant in the Sui and Tang dynasties, but during the Wude period, he had to think of the 18 scholars. Xuanzang nodded slightly and said, "Tian Sufu is a middle-aged man, the first of the 18 literary scholars, and Du Ruhui of the Du family in Jingzhaofu." Li Shan swallowed his saliva and said, "Which male from Kaiyang County?" The left guard of the Crown Prince, led by the East Palace Censorate, and Wei Ting of the Wei family in Jingzhou Prefecture, are reportedly close friends of the Crown Prince when he was young. Li Shan's eyes were dazed. If he got involved in this kind of thing, was he killing himself? What's even worse is that although others may not care, they actually stood on the side of the East Palace and threw away the thigh of the Qin Prince's mansion. Chapter 10. Elders Dare Not Resign. You are listening at novelfull.audio. How kind the monk is. Li Shan, with a dark face, took out an envelope from his pocket and handed it over. Lingnan Road, Guangzhou Governor's Office, Persian Sea Ship, the route map has been drawn. If everything goes smoothly, it can arrive in India within a month. Li Shan remembers this very clearly. In elementary school, when he read Journey to the West, a devout Buddhist grandfather talked about Tang Sanzang's journey to the West to obtain scriptures. Although he was admirable, he was not smart enough because during the Tang Dynasty, another monk set sail from Guangzhou by sea and arrived in India in 20 days. After the transaction was completed, Li Shan left with a face pulled and strolled on the street with Zhu Ba. "Dalong, I really can't go to Kangfang again today." Li Shan looked at this scumbag speechlessly, "But you were quite lenient." Zhu Ba whispered, "Uncle Qi said that he will buy 2 maids to serve you in a few days. That was the culture of the old society, and I was a 3 good student who grew up under the red flag." When Li Shanjua bought a maid, could he choose goods himself? He couldn't find a little fairy like Xiaoman, but he couldn't find a crooked melon or a split date, could he? However, Kangfang is indeed not allowed to go. That day, he claimed to be Li Bai, with the courtesy name Tai Bai. After some thought, Li Shan decided to return to Jijiagu and was still thinking about today's events on the way. Who would have thought that Du Ruhui would go to Dongshan Temple yesterday? It seems that Du Ruhui's face didn't look very good yesterday. Li Shan gave a bitter smile, saying that his methods were cunning. Wouldn't it happen that he was talking about Du Ruhui? Returning to the village, Li Shan still had a worried expression on his face. Seeing this, Zhu Wei, who had been waiting for news, sighed first and then came up to persuade. In response to the call of the government soldiers, the young people in the village were enthusiastic and paid taxes. They began selling Qiong milk tomorrow. Li Shan listened anxiously for a while before realizing it and said with a dry smile, "The monk promised to come down. If nothing unexpected happens, Dongshan Temple should not be on the list of revolutionaries." Zhu Wei was stunned for a while before patting his thigh and exclaiming with joy, "Is that really the case? We'll go into the city tomorrow to investigate." The confusion gradually grew in Li Shan's mind. What exactly is the origin of Jijiagu? The clan leader Zhu Wei was able to inquire so many days in advance that it was Xuanzang's inspection, and it seemed very certain that the truth would be confirmed tomorrow. Zhu Wei noticed something unusual about Li Shan and said, "De Lang, why are you so unhappy? I met two people at the Grand Master Temple today." Li Shan squinted his eyes and looked at Zhu Wei, probing and asking, "One is led by the Crown Prince Zhuo Wei of the Eastern Palace, Wei Ting of the Wei family in the Jingzhou Prefecture, and the other is the Zhonglang of the Taiyans Prefecture, Du Ruhui of the Du family in the Jingzhou Prefecture." Zhu Wei's expression changed, and he asked closely. Li Shan was vague and perfunctory, half true and half false. After all, he was a traveler who was familiar with the history of the Tang Dynasty. Li Shan had already figured everything out on his way back to Jijiagu. Nowadays, none of the generals in Hebei are opponents of Lu Haida, and even Li Shiji has suffered a disastrous defeat. Next, the king of Qin, Li Shimin, will inevitably go on an expedition. To put it bluntly, Li Jianqing hopes that his brother will suffer a few defeats at Lu Haida's place. As the second son, Li Shimin's position and prestige in the court were earned through his invincible and invincible military achievements, and he could not accept the possibility of failure. Lu Haida swept through Hebei, winning consecutive battles with sharp edges. However, due to insufficient troops in Guangzhou, Li Shimin decided not to use his own foundation to lead the Six Guards and Xuanjia cavalry to confront the enemy head-on. So, the Taiyans Prefecture is trying to push for the closure of temples as soon as possible to make up for the shortage of troops, which is also very important for the Taiyans Prefecture itself. Anyway, this matter was ordered by the sage Li Yuan. But what the Taiyans mansion wants to do, the Eastern Palace will definitely go against the trend. Li Shimin is determined to make progress, so Li Jianqing needs to show grace and magnanimity. This is just a small collision. But the problem is that Dongshan Temple has become a target, while Li Shan has actively jumped into this vortex. The king of Qin is not only a general of the heavenly strategy, but also a minister of personnel, ranking as prime minister. How could he care about such small matters? Zhu Wei smiled and shook his head. The Grand Master has thought too much. Glancing at Zhu Wei's flickering gaze, and then at his mother Zhu Shi who had walked out of the inner room at an unknown time, Li Shan did not refute it. He could confirm that the seventh uncle in front of him was by no means an ordinary farmer. Ordinary villagers would not understand the complex and difficult situation of the court, let alone the fact that Li Shimin also served as the minister. Of course, ordinary people would not inquire about Xuanzang's responsibility for inspecting temples and other matters. Qibua is not an ordinary farmer, and obviously, Zhu Shi is not an ordinary Lingnan woman. Li Shan couldn't help but imagine. Lingnan was the main location for exiled officials and their families in the Sui dynasty, and Li Du himself was exiled to Lingnan, so it seems logical to find someone who shares the same illness to form a family. Dalong doesn't need to worry. If that monk doesn't cause trouble, there will always be other temples that have been abolished. Big shots like the king of Qin won't be able to see Dongshan Temple. Li Shan nodded slightly, and important figures such as Li Shimin and Li Jianqing, even Du Ruhui, should not be stingy in seeking the misfortune of Jijiagu. Putting aside all these troubles, Li Shan smiled and said, "From today on, with the praise of Xuanzang, Dongshan Temple will surely become famous." Master Wuchao, bring the true scriptures to the east. Don't laugh, seventh uncle. Zhu Wei couldn't help but burst into a smile and said, you narrow-minded person, you count yourself as a mute servant. If you were exposed. Mute uncle can't speak anyway. If there are guests visiting, just close your eyes and rest assured. As Xuanzang and I have agreed, there will be new translations of the Diamond Sutra and Heart Sutra at Dongshan Temple, and there will be people in the city seeking scriptures. Zhu Wei stopped laughing and continued, no wonder you never allowed Qiong Yao Jiang to be sold in the east and west markets before. It turns out you had this idea in mind. The eminent monk brings scriptures to the east, and Yu reads books at www.yuukangshu.net. He hangs orders at Dongshan Temple and secretly makes Qiong milk. How can we sell it at a low price? Zhu Wei looked at Zhu Shi and arched his hand, saying, with such a thoughtful mind, seeing the big picture from the small is definitely not a vulgar thing in the future. Li Shan looked serious. Bean curd jelly served with sauce was sold in the east and west markets and could earn a few dollars, but it was not enough to pay taxes. Appearing to the titles of high monks and scriptures in Dongshan Temple can either establish fame or maximize benefits. What's more, if Dongshan Temple is not abolished, villagers do not need to pay taxes, and the money for selling bean curd jelly served with sauce. As soon as Li Shan Gang thought of this, Zhu Wei made a decision and said, this matter is all up to you to coordinate. The benefits of Qiong Yao's liquor are all yours. I really want to agree, but unfortunately, my mother who prioritizes righteousness is right beside me. Li Shan carefully examined Zhu Wei's expression and suspected in his heart whether the old man deliberately picked on his mother to talk about this. Chibwa laughed and said in the records of the grand historian. It's better to have 100 pounds of gold than 100 pounds of jibuino. Li Shan forced a smile and said, the Sodat called one promise for 1,000 gold was agreed upon on the same day. How can the boy retract his promise? Zhu Wei stroked his beard and praised, turning his head to look at the Zhu family. Although that's the case, if we investigate tomorrow, Dongshan Temple will not be abolished. In the future, you two will need money to settle down, build a house, and purchase land. This way, regardless of the amount, De Lang will share 50% of the profits. Li Shan hid aside, watching the two people plead back and forth, thinking to himself whether to build a new house or a courtyard house. Finally, after Li Shan's persuasion, it was decided that the Li family would benefit 30%, and the remaining 70% would be used for other purposes in the future. Zhu Wei sighed and said, to save the lives of the living, to solve the crisis in the temple, and such great kindness. The young master is waiting. That day, when you said you wanted to take a concubine and have sex, I will choose 2 charming daughters for you. Li Shan was taken aback for a moment, then solemnly bowed and said, the elder dares not resign.